Hey everybody, Plushie here, and today we're going to be talking about the brand new SSR for this year's White Day, as well as potential SSR in Ordeal Call 4, Dante Alighieri. It's basically confirmed because he is a story lock servant despite being released in an event, so he's gonna be tied to the next major story chapter, which is Ordeal Call 4. It's pretty exciting because Divine Comedy has been teased for quite a long time, and finally they're doing it, and in the Ruler chapter as well, which makes so much sense. So he's already very hyped in terms of like lore reasons, but how does he do gameplay wise? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. So without further ado, let's get into today's hot take video on Dante. Taking a look at his base stats, his attack stat is unfortunately pretty low, actually the lowest amongst all SSR pretenders, even lower than the ones that are basically pure supports, which is unfortunate because he does want to be a DPS. He is star attribute, which is quite rare. Defensively, he is not weak to Enuma Elish and all that, but it's not like you're going to be able to tank enemy MPs all the time anyways. But this does make him fight beasts a little bit more efficiently, which I wonder, would that be relevant in the main story? In terms of base gain, I think it's really good. Like, it's almost 2% arts cards and quick cards. Like, his quick card is obviously not great, looking at this, but his arts cards are really good, and he has a pretty standard BBAAQ deck, which is super great for, an offensive servant, both in Arts MP and Buster MP, to be honest, and he has an AoE Arts MP, so this is really nice for, just overall damage. He is neutral balance, which is a trait that is extremely hard to have synergy with, unfortunately, with certain supports. His first skill is a 20% rainbow buff for 3 turns, as well as a 1-time 3-turn guts that revives him with 1000 HP on a 6-turn cooldown. Honestly, in a vacuum, this is a pretty horrible skill. Like, it's a hard survival, but it's in the worst form possible. It only lasts for 3 turns, and it revives him with just puny 1000 HP. And a 20% rainbow buff is not great either for a servant who basically never wants to pick their quick card. But this does allow him to have certain synergies with units. The guts allows him to have synergy with Tezcali Polka if you're trying to have like a multi-core farming team, which we'll see he does have capacity for, and the rainbow allows him to have synergy with Yui Shosetsu. I do have a review on Yui Shosetsu, so if you want a reminder on how she works, basically her MP would buff your attack up if you have a quick up, it would buff your crit up if you have an arts up, and it would buff your MP damage up if you have a buster up. So if you have all 3 color type buffs on your DPS, then the MP is absolutely nuts. And in particular, I really like rainbow buffs on arch servants because Yui Shosetsu, at least one of her bigger buffs, is her crit buff. She can buff a servant's critical damage from 60 to 80% when you combine her skills and MP if they have a rainbow buff. And arch servants generally don't have the best source of crit damage, so having access to Yui Shosetsu is very nice. But obviously this relies on you having Yui Shosetsu, so still not the greatest in a vacuum. Dante's second skill is a 20 star bomb, and it also allows him to either set the field to heaven or hell. It is a 5-turn field effect on the top right. The field will instantly deactivate if he gets killed, but it would still linger if you swap him into the backline with a plug suit. So he gets different buffs depending on what field he is currently present in. So if he's in heaven, he gives the party 20% arts up for 3 turns, gives the party 50% crit up for 3 turns, and he gives the party 1000 heal per turn for 3 turns. But if he's in hell, he gives the party 20% buster up for 3 turns, party-wide 30% MP damage up for 3 turns, and himself slow charge MP 10% per turn for 3 turns. Interestingly, if he is both in heaven and hell, because you can double stack this skill either by cooldown reduction or bringing 2 Dantes, the Dante that activate the skill, when both fields are active, he would get all 6 of these buffs, which is kind of crazy. And all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So the skill in a vacuum is already extremely strong just for him. As I mentioned earlier, Art's servants generally don't have the best access to critical damage, but this skill for himself, if he chooses Heaven mode, is a 20 star bomb and a 50% crit up, and in Hell mode, he's great for MP spamming, which is kind of unfortunate that the Arts and the Buster buffs aren't swapped, because obviously he can't do Buster damage with his MP, so he would much rather have the Arts up tied to the MP spammy skill effects, and the Buster up tied to the crit up effects. But you know, having this spread does make him a really good multi-core supporter for other Buster single targets or AoEs, because it's a 20% Buster up and 30% MP damage up that is on par or better than a lot of the common multi-core farmers even. So this is quite nice. And also in single core arts looping in general, you would still want to pick Hell mode, because 30% MP damage up is better than 20% arts up, and also the slow charge makes his refund even better than just the 20% arts up. So Hell mode for MP spam, Heaven mode for crit DPS. Heaven mode, I would say you almost never choose in multi-core farming unless you have some like carding turns involved, but that is also kind of unusual. The only gripe I have with this is the slow charge effect on his Buster or Hell mode is not party-wide. If that was party-wide, then I would brand him as like a super strong multi-core farmer, but as of now, he is just a decent one because he doesn't have actually any form of party charge. Dante's third skill is a 50 MP battery that also gives him 7 stacks of the Brand of Sin status. It is a special 10% debuff resistance down effect that is not removable by any external sources except by himself, which he can do by either triggering this on attack effect, which lasts for 3 turns, where whenever he attacks a target that has a removable buff, he would remove that buff and also remove 1 stack of Brand of Sin, and he would get 10% attack up for 3 turns. He can also remove Brand of Sin by triggering his own Guts. If he dies and he revives with a Guts, it would also remove a stack of Brand of Sin and give him 10% attack up for 3 turns. And all of this is on a 6-turn cooldown. So this looks very complicated, but the easiest way to understand this is if you have used Saber Barghest before. Saber Barghest essentially has like the same effect where she will remove a buff whenever she hits someone, and if she actually did remove a buff, she would put a 10% defense down on the enemy for 3 turns. It's very similar. There are a couple of differences. Number one is Dante's activation of this is limited, because it only activates 7 times. It can only remove a total of 7 buffs, and then it would, no longer have any effect. And number 2, this actually works on his MP. So if he was fighting against a 3 enemy challenge quest, for example, and all 3 of them has a removable buff, when he uses his MP would remove 1 buff from each target and consume 3 stacks of Brand of Sin and give him 30% attack up for 3 turns. So it's kind of an alternative version. It's, in my opinion, stronger, but it is also a lot more limited because he only gets 7 triggers per skill effect. And Brand of Sin being a debuff resistance down by 70% usually doesn't matter, but there are some bosses that have like low chance to stun, which usually you don't have to worry that much. But with this Brand of Sin stack, he would essentially guaranteed to get stunned or charmed or whatever by certain bosses, which is kind of annoying until he removes a big portion of it. The on Guts trigger condition is, in my opinion, not really relevant at all. He has his own Guts, but you're probably screwing up if you trigger Guts on an Arts AoE servant unless you're soloing with him. But overall, it's a nice skill. It's a 50 battery. It allows him to be really good at farming in combination with his skill 2 especially, and also, the Brand of Sin package is interesting and circumstantially extremely strong. His passives, unfortunately, really sucks. 9% crit up and 5.2% arts up. It's just nothing exciting. It does line up with how he plays, but overall, a bit disappointing. And finally, his MP is an AoE 4-hit arts MP that gives him a different anti-trait power mod depending on what field he's in. So if he's in Heaven's field, he would get a 1 turn 50% anti-sky power mod, and if he's in Hell field, he'll get a 50% anti-earth power mod. And if he's in both Heaven and Hell, he would get both the power mods when he uses his MP. The MP also inflicts 2000 curse on all enemies for 5 turns and drains their charge by 1. And finally, the overcharge effect is a 3-turn MP damage up ramp up effect that triggers before the MP does damage, that scales from 20% all the way up to 40%. So this is a really solid MP, despite it only being 4 hits, because of his really decent base gain, as well as his second skill slow charge effect. He is a really good arts looper. And also, he of course can customize his own anti-trait. Now, these aren't super effective. These are power mods, so the plus is that it applies to face cards, but he doesn't really care that much about it a lot of the times. And it stacks not as well as super effectives, because super effectives are always multiplicative, while P mods are additive to MP damage up. So this can get very much like watered down by Oberon and Black Grail, but still it is really strong, and he essentially has very, very good coverage because he can just choose which field he wants depending on what enemies he is fighting against. The curse is basically a non-effect, but the drain is again really good. AoE arts that spams drain, so he can technically prevent enemies from MPing, multiple enemies from MPing for a very, very long time, kind of like Marie Alter. And finally, he has Space Ishtar ramp up, which is really nice, right? Like, there's nothing to complain about this. Space Ishtar ramp up has always been good and will always be good on arts AoEs, and he has that. So the MP hits decently hard on the 3rd turn, especially with combination with Oberon as well. And overall, it's just super nice because wide coverage, drain spam, as well as Space Ishtar ramp up. It's all good effects that you want, and its refund is also decent. So how do I feel about Dante? Well, in terms of farming, I think Dante is really competent in both single core and multi-core farming. Single core is easier to understand. Of course, he has a 50 MP battery, and he has decent base gain and then 4-hit AoE arts MP. In terms of damage, I like to compare him to Summer Ibuki, because I do think at the end of the day, they would be fighting for the same kind of nodes. Dante hits 1.5 times super effective against all night classes, while Ibuki hits super effective against all classes at 1.5 times multiplier. I can also compare him with Cagliostro, who's another AoE arts 50 MP charging pretender, but he is a 4-star, so the numbers are not that fair, so I decided to cut it out of the video. This comparison is using an MP1 copy of each of these servants and only using double Castoria without using any Mystic Codes or any CE, while looping on 3 sabers. I tried to do as bare bones as possible in terms of the setup, because obviously when you start throwing in stuff like Black Grail or other event CEs and Oberon, the numbers start to shift pretty drastically. And I do believe one of the big advantages of arts looping is how easy it is. You can kind of make any setup work as long as you have double Castoria. So this is why I decided to go for that. And as you can see here, Dante, no matter in Heaven or Hell mode, honestly has really, really decent damage compared to Summer Ibuki. Starting from wave 2, he beats Ibuki in both forms, especially in Hell mode, and of course on wave 3 he beats Ibuki even more. This is mainly because of his ability to actually ramp up his MP damage. As you can see here, I also specifically included the refund numbers just to show you that Dante actually has very competent base refund. However, do take these with a grain of salt, because these are affected by overkill, and also different classes you hit are going to give you different refunds. So this is only here to be like a sort of reference against Ibuki's refund. The conclusion here is simply Dante is, of course, very competent in terms of being an arts looper. You can absolutely use him in night classes and you will feel like he is really, really good. But of course, even though Hell Mode is slightly more optimal, assuming neither of them are hitting traits, the more likely scenario is that because he is anti-Sky in Heaven Mode and anti-Earth in Hell Mode, you would just pick whatever he counters. It is quite nice that he has the ability to have anti-Sky damage, because anti-Sky is not the most common in terms of anti-traits on servants. The only other really big arts looper that has it, at least from my memory, is Durga. BB Dubai technically has it, but it's only a 30% power mod. So I don't have a really good reference of comparison here, but of course, we all know that Ibuki also has anti-Earth. So I have the numbers here as well, comparing both of them when they're hitting against Earth attribute. Now, do note that I preset that every single wave are Earth enemies, so normally this doesn't happen. But as you can see here, relative to their base performance when neither hitting trait, Ibuki actually is performing a lot better. The reason behind that are, number one, Ibuki is of the Sky attribute, while Dante is of the Star attribute. So when a Sky attribute servant hits an Earth attribute enemy, she also gets a hidden 1.1 times multiplier because of the trait advantage, while Star is always going to be hitting neutral unless it's attacking against Beast. The second reason, of course, is because Dante's anti-trait is in the form of a power mod, which is additive to MP damage boosts, which he does ramp up with the other effect of his MP. So in reality, his damage is not multiplied by 1.5 compared to his traitless damage, while Ibuki's damage is basically its traitless damage multiplied by 1.5, because in terms of Ibuki, her anti-Earth is in the form of a super effective, which is always calculated multiplicatively to all other buff types. Outside of single core, Dante is also very good at multi-core, mainly thanks to his second skill's Hell Mode. It gives the entire party a 20% buster up and 30% MP damage up for 3 turns, and it also gives himself 10% MP slow charge per turn, which I believe is more relevant in multi-core because he's not going to have nearly as much refund as when he is in single core. The party-wide buff is a really nice number, making him a great partner to other buster multi-core farmers. However, Dante, despite having a lot of self-MP charge, he doesn't have any form of party-wide MP charge. So you probably want to pair him with multi-core farmers that has some form of party charge, or at the very least have Castoria or Merlin be the other buffer, because at least they have 30 party-wide charge. I think one of Dante's best multi-core farming partners is Phantasmoon. Phantasmoon is a single target buster pretender, so the buff perfectly matches Dante's second skill Hell Mode, and usually you are pairing single targets with AoEs in multi-core farming, so it's kind of just perfect. They're also both pretenders, so they will be counterclassing the exact same targets. But most importantly, Phantasmoon's first skill is a party-wide 30 MP charge, which sort of makes up for Dante's lack of any form of party charge. Phantasmoon's party-wide buffs are also generally not card type dependent, so despite Dante having an Arts MP, he can fully receive the buffs from Phantasmoon. And finally, Phantasmoon's first skill also has a party-wide overcharge boost, which helps Dante's MP damage. You can of course also experiment with double Dante, because of course with double Dante, his second skill, at least the second Dante who activates it, can activate both heaven and hell effects. However, I find this combo a little bit problematic compared to other traditional multi-core double systems such as double Tez or double Lohi, because Dante lacks any form of party charge. However, I do think there is one condition where you can justify doing double Dante, which is if you want to run a critical farming team, or at least partially critical farming team, because if you click Heaven with the first Dante and Hell with the second, your entire party would get 2 Heaven buffs and 1 Hell buff. And the Heaven buff is a 50% party-wide crit up for 3 turns. So with double Dante, your entire party would get 100% crit up, which is a lot. And Dante's second skill is also a 20 star bomb. So at the very least, when you activate both of your Dante skill 2 on turn 1, the crit is basically guaranteed. You can of course also bring other partners that has star generation per turn effects, again like Phantasmoon, to sustain further critical damage on the following couple of turns. Of course, with crit comps, you don't necessarily have to use your MP every turn, and you don't necessarily need that much starting charge on your CEs as well. With all that being said, the crit comp is usually reserved for lower HP nodes, and it's probably not going to be enough damage in 90++ in most cases, even though for his particular event, it did actually work pretty well. In terms of Challenge Quest performance, Dante is predominantly going to be an AoE arts looper. That's just what he is built for, but he does get a lot of benefits from spamming his MP. On top of the ramp up damage we already talked about when discussing his farming, he also has an AoE drain, which is a very terrifying effect when slapped onto a spammable AoE arts MP. This means that if he's fighting against multiple enemies at once, he can shut down all of their MP turns for a very long time simultaneously. This is the reason why they almost never give AoE arts MP spammable drain. The only one that is recent in my memory is Marie Alter. Dante also has customizable anti-trait on his MP. Depending on if he chooses Heaven or Hell, he has anti-sky or anti-earth. And of course, with certain team builds, he can even trigger both fields at once. And once again, if you are fighting against multiple servants at once, maybe one is sky and the other is earth, and if you manage to get Heaven and Hell at the same time, he would be able to cover both of them with his MP's anti-trait. Dante also, surprisingly enough, has really good card damage despite being an AoE arts looper, which usually don't have really good access to crit damage. The first source is from his own skill 2. His skill 2, when selecting Heaven mode, gives the entire party, including himself, 50% crit up for 3 turns, as well as a 20 star bomb. So he can actually dish out quite a lot of crit damage just off the bat from that skill alone. And as long as you can generate more stars with another support, such as Proto Merlin or Yui Shosetsu, then he can continuously dish out good card damage, making him actually viable to use against even a singular enemy boss. Speaking of Yui Shosetsu, she is the other source of his crit damage. His first skill is a 3-turn rainbow buff, and when Yui uses her MP on someone who has all 3 color type buffs, she would give all 3 different buff effects. Yui is a great support for art servants in particular who has rainbow buffs because she can give a total of 60 to 80% crit up with her skill set and her MP. And arts units usually don't have the best supports for crit damage. You either have to choose between Lady Avalon, who only does it for 1 turn, or Pope Joan, who only buffs your arts crit damage and also doesn't buff a lot of anything else. We have seen other examples, such as Ruler Moriarty as an AoE arts unit who has rainbow buffs, be pretty good at critting just because of Yui as well. Dante also has the special ability to remove buffs from the enemy with his skill 3. So if the enemy likes to spam a lot of buffs or has a couple of key buffs, such as Kamazat's Red Guts on Break 2, then Dante might not be a horrible matchup. Do note that he also has the ability to remove 1 buff from multiple targets at once if he uses his MP while skill 3 is in play. But this is a buff removal after damage, and also he would actually use up the 7 Brands of Sin stacks very quickly if he's spamming against 3 enemies that all have removable buffs. 2 MPs will take him down to 1 stack left, even if we don't count any cards. And finally, of course, we have to talk about the Heaven and Hell double field effect on his skill 2, where he gets to trigger all 6 different effects. I think most comps that brute force this is not very good for challenge quests. Like if you do double Dante for challenge quest, for example, it is not that great. The 3 bonus effect from his skill 2 is simply not worth cutting a meta support for another Dante. You can also run him in a predominantly buster team, which I actually did demonstrate a couple of times on my channel, where you use double Koyan Light and immediately double cast that skill 2 on turn 1. In general, he would probably prefer just spamming his MP. Basically, I don't think having both Heaven and Hell Field is worth giving up on the more solid Arts challenge quest team on Dante. So this is actually why I think the third method is viable, which is just running Tamamo. Yes, it is not guaranteed because you have to use Tamamo's MP more than twice within 5 turns in order to get that skill to cast again before the first 5-turn field runs out. It is the only way to not give up on all of the benefits of him being in an arts team while still having the ability to have both Heaven and Hell Field at once. Tamamo also has the added benefit of helping his skill 3 to not run out of Brands of Sin that easily, because now with Tamamo's cooldown reduction, the uptime of that skill would be quite high. So overall, I think just still use him in an arts team. Don't try to meme with like the Buster thing. In conclusion, Dante Alighieri, despite being an AoE arts looper, is not boring nor one-dimensional. He's of course a really competent AoE arts single core looper who also has ramp up and customizable anti-traits, but he is also a very good multi-core farmer that can support other Buster multi-core units very well, especially working extremely well with the already top-tier Phantasmoon. In terms of challenge quests, again, he has customizable anti-traits, which is really good. He also has the capacity for decent card damage despite being an AoE arts looper, and he also has a lot of different tools that is great for challenge quests. Dante's the first SSR of this year that I think you can actually pull slightly for gameplay, mainly because of his capacity for multi-core as well as his Pretender class. So even at low MP levels like MP 1 or 2, his Pretender class allows him to not have to hit neutral when you use him. So he can actually push through damage thresholds still pretty easily at lower MP levels, as opposed to other mainly neutral multi-core farmers. Dante, of course, also provides really good party-wide buffs, and he can serve as sort of a early wave clear slash buffer if you only have him at like MP1, for example. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Finally, I'm able to push this out before the banner ends and the event ends. And you know, the Komachi video would be out sometime later because I have to put it together still, and I'm in exam week. But yeah, glad to get this out of the way, and I'll see you guys in the next one.